Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We have two wonderful poets with us today, Kim Noriega and Kimberly Lyons. Kim will read first, and then Kimberly. Kim Noriega is the author of Naming the Roses, released in June 2024 by Aim Higher Incorporated, and Name Me, published in 2010 by Fortunate Daughter Press. She is an award-winning poet, creative nonfiction writer, and teacher. Her poem, Heaven, 1963, was featured in former poet laureate Ted Kuzer's syndicated column, American Life in Poetry. She is the poetry editor of the Poetry Distillery, a teaching artist with the Poetry Barn, and a certified facilitator of the creative regeneration process. She lives in San Diego with her husband, Ernie, and 6 cats, 5 of whom were once feral. Here's an outstanding poet, Kim Noriega.
Thank you so much, Harry. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate you inviting me to be here today. I'm going to read primarily from my new book, Naming the Roses, which you can see here. It, as you said, it came out earlier this year from Aim Higher Inc., and I'm just thrilled with it. It's beautiful. It turned out wonderfully, and I'm just tickled to be here to read from it. I'm going to start with a poem called Postcard to My Younger Self Beneath the Apple Trees. I didn't know I loved your hair, loosed from its braid, a golden dervish, or your plump little back, or your laugh like the crack of a whip, or the sound of your voice like a bell on a cold, clear night, or your eyes, those bright, sad stars. I didn't know I loved your knees, crisscrossed with scars from climbing up trees, or your fat little legs. What good could those be? I knew I loved apple blossoms raining down in spring. I didn't know I'd love my face, shining back up at them. And the title of this poem and the epigraph comes from the poem Date by Anna Sphere, and it's translated by Sarah Lupchai. At the edge of my body, where my skin is, wait for me, I'm coming. 1. Scalding rain pours from the showerhead. Transfixed, I trace the bloom of my seared thigh, a rubescent rosebud. 2. Listen. You can crawl into the cave of yourself, abide there, numb, incapable of speech. But see how the cave walls bloom with luminous mosses, how they gather radiance from the faintest light. 3. Last night, I dreamed I journeyed to the desert, sweet water in a Boda bag slung over my back. That the parched earth, when I wetted it, burst into flames, into a burning sea of red-violet wildflowers. 4. This morning, I awoke with the memory of floating in my own womb, of suckling at my own full breast in that sea of myself, translucent as a jellyfish, but human nearly. And this next poem is a persona poem, and it begins with an epigraph by Barbara Dubois, as quoted in Convicted Survivors, The Imprisonment of Battered Women Who Kill, by Elizabeth Dermody Leonard. And this is the epigraph. The power of naming is at least twofold. Naming defines the quality and value of that which is named, and it also denies reality and value to that which is never named. never uttered. That which has no name, that for which we have no words or concepts, is rendered mute and invisible, powerless to inform or transform our consciousness or our experience, our understanding, our vision, powerless to claim its own existence. This has been the situation of women in our world. And this is Name Me. Name me the girl with the slate blue eyes, the girl who sits under the apple tree, your apple-cheeked bride. Name me your lover, the mother of your 8-pound baby boy. Name me Sugar Lips. Name me Honey Girl. Name me Sweet Potato Pie. Name me the woman with the black and blue eye. Name me White Roses. Name me, I swear, baby. Name me crushed larynx. Name me fractured mandible. Name me, but I was high, baby. It don't count when you're high. Name me whore. Name me get in that fucking kitchen, bitch. Name me dislocated shoulder. Name me, what you gonna do? Have me arrested? Name me, I dare you to try and leave me. Name me the woman with 7 broken toes. Name me the cunt you tell not to make a sound. Name me tramp, slut, ugly, ball and chain. Name me the woman you love. To get up against the wall and fuck with your 38. Name me the woman who found the dog lying in a pool of blood outside our daughter's door. Name me the one who dug the dog's grave, posted lost signs the next day with our kids. Name me the mother of children who will never be safe. Name me sleepless. Name me the little missus who bought a 9mm. Name me shows no remorse. Name me guilty as charged. Name me not sorry. Name me widow. Name me the woman in cell C15. Name me free. And now I'm going to read a couple of newer poems that aren't part of the book, but they are featured online as part of California Poets Project. Last summer, I was on the first jury that I ever served on, and it was, as you'll hear, a horrific domestic violence case. The only way I survived it emotionally was to, on the breaks, between hearing and viewing evidence, was to rush into the ladies' room and write furiously in my journal. And that's how I got through it. It was a 3-week trial. And these are the poems that resulted from that, or 2 of them anyways. And this one is After Jury Duty, How Do I Love Thee, for Ernie. 3 weeks of mandated silence. Each night I'm desperate to tell you why I've come home weeping again, but can only offer the trial with a futile wave of my hand. But now it's done. We, the jury, have delivered a modicum of justice. And tonight, when I walk in the door, you say, tell me whatever you want to tell. And I say, the gun, huge, .357 Magnum, hollow points, shot his wife, left her bleeding on the floor. Guess who's next, he told her. Then went to find the girls, in their beds, in their pajamas. I say, the 911 call, we had to listen to it 3 times. her labored breathing, her fading voice. She had dragged her body to the bed, to her cell phone. God, how did she manage it? She tells the dispatcher her address, says, hurry, please, hurry. In the background, we can hear a girl screaming, help me, help me. We know from body cam footage that it's Rachel, the older daughter, who is lying in her own blood on the bedroom floor where she fell when he shot her in the spine. She had tried to run out the back door, but it was stuck shut. I'm sobbing now, barely able to get the words out. And here's what really kills me, I tell you. We know he's standing right there, emptied gun in hand. We saw the photos, his bloody footprints where he'd stepped over Rachel's body. And when I look up, I see that you are weeping too. And this poem begins with an epigraph from the office of San Diego County District Attorney, also from the trial. On July 27th, after one day of deliberation, a jury convicted P. Ramirez of all counts and allegations, including attempted murder, attempted manslaughter, and possession of a firearm by a felon. Deputy D.A. Lorenz prosecuted this case. And this is called After the Verdict for Alex Lorenz. Just like that, as if we haven't been required to sit here, to be dragged through the wreckage of these people's lives day after day or weeks. We're up and out of the courtroom. We've delivered our verdict. We're done. We're free to go back to our own lives, but instead, we linger in the hallway, all 12 of us, basking in the palpable relief of the victims, of their family members, of the first responders who saved their lives 2 years ago. One by one, they thank us, hug our necks, weep. I join the line of people waiting to shake your hand, where Sophie, one of the girls the defendant tried to kill, is passing out silk flowers she made in the hospital. She hands me a rose, whispers, "Thank you." And though my part was small, I beam at her. Think of the assertion made by the defense attorney in her closing argument. We cannot undo what has been done. There is no justice. And your reply, no justice? Oh no, there is justice. When I reach you, I begin to cry, explaining that I too have survived, that my daughter has survived. You are kind and tough. You are here fighting, pregnant and in 4-inch heels, for justice for 2 young girls and their mother, and for the young woman I once was, sleeping daughter in my arms, husband's knife blade cold against my throat. Okay, I think we'll lighten up a little now. My mother and I had a complicated relationship over the years, and she passed away earlier this year. So I thought I'd read a poem for her from some of our best times together. And this is Washing Dishes with My Mother. Even past my bedtime, she let me drag the red stool to the sink to help her wash the dishes. She'd suds up one side, then fill the other with clear water for me. My job to rinse and dry. We'd scan the sky through the window above the sink, searching for the first star to wish upon, then the big and little dippers. God, she was a movie star in the glow from the overhead light, head thrown back, laughing at my quips, hair soft blonde, waving down her face, all Veronica Lake. She didn't bother with an apron or with rubber gloves to protect her elegant hands. She was so young, could not yet imagine regret. I have two more poems to read. This one is for Mrs. Hogue, my neighbor growing up. When I grew up across, she grew up, let me rephrase that. I grew up across the street from her. And she, by the way, bought me my first book of poetry. She bought me the complete works of Emily Dickinson when I was 10, bless her heart. So this is Knitting Lessons for Mrs. Hogue. When I'd visit after school, you'd be clicking away, sitting at your kitchen table, a marble gold smoldering in the ashtray, your cat, Huntley, curled in your lap, crisp white blouse tucked deftly into a walking skirt. In winter, a hand-knit cardigan too, draped over your shoulders. When I asked you to teach me, you said, "Of course, dear," and handed over your current work in progress. Grasp the needles, one in each hand, firmly but not too tightly, you said. Hold the stitchwork loosely with your fingers. Angle the needle tips slightly together. Glide the needle beneath the yarn. Now, wrap around, pull back through, and you've made your first stitch. I came back the next day with fat wooden needles scrounged from our attic, a meager skein of peach yarn, and our lessons commenced in earnest. Slip knot, cast on, knit two, purl one, you taught in your kindly Southern voice, that blanket of acceptance. Even later, when I ran wild, stealing your cigarettes, you must have known, and your son's heart, which surely I broke. Sneaking out with that Miller boy, joyriding in your 66 Tempest. Mistakes are to be expected, you'd say, as you'd take my little peach scarf into your hands and, overlooking much, I imagine, peer at it over the tops of your glasses, checking for inconsistent tension, uneven rows, stitches dropped. And worth fixing, you'd add with a wink, handing it back. So there I'd sit beside you, our heads wreathed in a Marlboro gold halo, knitting those same stitches over and over till I finally learned, which I must admit took longer than I ever could have imagined. And I'll close with the title poem of my book, Naming the Roses, which actually I wrote as a part of the Visible Poetry Project. And it's kind of unique in that it was a reverse visible poem. Usually the way that works is, a poet submits a poem that's accepted, and then the filmmaker makes a film to that poem. But we had this unique situation where my filmmaker dropped out, and a poet dropped out after her filmmaker had made this film. So they paired us up, and the result is Naming the Roses. I wrote the poem to the film. And you can see that it's on my website, kimnoriega.com. It's also on the Visible Poetry Project. It's a great film. She did a great job. Michelle Tsageras was the filmmaker. And also, I should say that all the headings in the poem are names of roses. Naming the Roses. Wedding day. Petals tucked for luck in his pocket. Bride-to-be and me, little sea rose, secretly blooming in the ocean of her belly. Birthday girl. Look at me, naked, joy, no stone of grief yet cast at my feet. Maman Cochet. At the seaside, we sipped rosehip tea from melamine cups, played Ring a Ring of Roses, felt tears, laughing. Rainbow's End. You said there was only one path for a woman like me, 17 and pregnant. Dreams didn't matter. Women didn't have choices. Beautiful dreamer. I've been thinking, even the shadow of a rose brims with rain and sunlight. Windrose. What was I looking for? Winter moon, Irish lace, eventide, maiden's blush, you. Heirloom. Pruning grandmother's prize-winning canes, I sliced my hand deeply, and there you came, bubbling up crimson in the center of my lifeline. Salt spray rose. Legends say this hardy rose stowed away aboard a ship that wrecked off the coast of New Brunswick. Swept by the incoming tide to shore, she blooms there to this day, wild as a weed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kim. I love that last poem. It's such a beautiful poem.
Thank
Your
you.
poetry is loving, it's poignant, it's harrowing, it's tender. You write with such grace and a scalpel-like precision that helps us transcend, the actual act. And also your naming, we've always known, to name things, right? I mean, that's in creation myths. And so you also, your poetry gives us a relief at the end and a transcendence. So thank you very much for such a lovely reading. A couple of questions to ask you.
Sure.
When did you write your first poem?
Oh my. I started trying to write when I was really little. I started writing stories actually first when I was in first grade. I used to write stories, but then I would write these little rhymes and poems. I was probably 6 or 7. And, I wrote early on that my profession was going to be author. So, I wrote that all over the place when I was 7 or 8. Yeah.
What is it that attracts you to the poetry form?
Boy, great question. I think it's the ability to say so much with such few words. I tend toward I like to be kind of minimalist, I guess. And so I think it's the ability to say so much with so few words, and the ability to really hone in on the essential thing, the essence of something, the heart of it. I think that's what does it. And probably the musicality of it. I just love, I know that I lean toward reading prose that is musical as well. So I'm sure the musicality too has a lot to do with it. Yeah.
You said that you received Emily Dickinson poetry when you were very young.
Yeah.
I've read her complete poems, 1,789 poems, at least 4 times. And I love her too for her strength of line and her use of metaphor. Who are some of the poets who influence you before you began writing poetry in a regular, serious way?
Oh, wow. Well, I'm sure Emily Dickinson was one of them, because I was trying to, I was only 10 when Mrs. Ho gave me that book. So I didn't know what to make of it. But I used to have this, we had a lot of books growing up and around the house. And there was this one old book that had like The Rime of the Ancient Mariner in it and these other things. And so I would read those. And honestly, before I went into poetry, I loved Tennessee Williams plays. So I used to get these big books of plays when I was young and read those Tennessee Williams plays, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof and Night of the Iguana. And, so did I say cat? Not Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, Night of the Iguana. And so I think he influenced me. But later, some of my early influences, Lucille Clifton, I loved her and I still do. Ellen Bass was an early influence. And then, of course, I've had brilliant mentors. I've had Cecilia Wallach as a mentor, who's, as we all know, a brilliant poet, and Lissa Kiernan and Kim Adonisio. I've worked a little bit with her. So, it's endless. I mean, you can just, I worked in a library for almost 30 years. So I had, it's like a kid in a candy store, right? I mean, you could just walk over to the 800s and feast, so anything I wanted.
Well, you mentioned Tennessee Williams, and he's certainly a poet, and also the poetry that he read. And, Kazan once wrote about Tennessee Williams, and he said there's a violence and a tenderness inside him.
Mm-hmm.
And remember, he would talk about the kindness of strangers. And, I've read where, I'm a poet myself, and I know what I do during the daytime. Someone once said that when you're a poet, you write all day long. Obviously, you don't spend 24 hours writing, but whenever it strikes you, at least for me, I sit down and write it. What is a day like for you as a poet?
I write in fits and starts. I used to really try to be a daily writer, and I'm just not, and I finally accepted that about myself. I think I spend a lot of time mentally gathering, and then all of a sudden it'll be like, oh my God, I need to just write for the next 4 days straight or something, so often it goes like that for me. And I've just given up on trying to be a daily writer. I'm just not. But day to day, I really love open time and time to kind of just putz around and do this or make that or play with my cats or, whatever. And I think that's all building time, taking in things, I think that's when I'm really writing poems, to tell you the truth, because then they come out later, And, some people a lot of times ask about revision. And, I've had poems that come out kind of almost whole, not quite, after I, worked on them for however long in my head. But then I've got poems that take forever to revise. And it just depends on what it is, so. But I think as artists, we're always gathering information, and it ends up in a poem eventually, Well,
thank you very much for just such a luminous poetry reading. And I love your new book, Naming the Roses.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I appreciate the gift very much. And so thank you once again, Kim Noriega.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really been a pleasure.
It's a blessing. Thank you. Our next poet, there she is Kimberly Lyons. Kimberly Lyons lived in Arizona, Pennsylvania, California, South Dakota, and Minnesota before family moved to Chicago. She began writing poetry at the age of 16. After receiving a BA in literature at Bard College, I wonder if she studied with Robert Kelly, one of the great poets of America. Lyons moved to New York City in 1981. She worked as a program assistant at the Poetry Project and a publicity writer at Simon Schuster, and then as a social worker at several clinics, hospitals, and a women's shelter in Brooklyn, New York. Lyons is the author of books of poetry that include Capella, which came out in 2017, and Approximately Near, an ebook at the metembison.org site. Her essays on poetry and art have been published. A poem by her was included in the Best American Poetry 2023. Here's a marvelous poet, Kimberly Lyons.
Hi, thank you. Thanks, everybody. Harriet, cannot believe I sent you that extensive bio. Oh my God, what was I thinking? But fun to hear. Thank you so much, everybody. Don't be alarmed, friends, if you see my face looming on the screen, because I have to kind of lean in to be able to read the poems. Allegra, I want to thank you for your reading of very powerful witness poetry with beauty in it. And I thought that knitting poem was kind of a parable about living. Thank you so much. So these are a mix of poems from 2024, 2023, and maybe one or two poems that are older that are in a manuscript forthcoming title, Drawn Out of Night. Unilitro. Dark red is the something that arrives in August, a limited quantity hidden in the pantry, where I find it snooping in someone's kitchen and took it for my own. Took it away in a candle-shaped bottle. The battlefield is soggy with its desiccated history embedded in the dirt, strewn with shadows and the words pinned to the silence. The family stands among the big old trees. The other red is the sky smushed with color and clouds in the process of falling apart. You may see Vega in our hemisphere, or the hummingbird moth that appeared to peer in my face, as though I were a weird sky or a wall also. The sadness of its withdrawal into a red so dark it's black. And this is a poem titled Swimming, very new for my friend Charlotte Mandel, the translator. And I believe and hope she may be here. So, Swimming for Charlotte Mandel. You have been asleep, then awake on a train, when the rim of the world is stained with raspberry or blood or the foreshadow of fire ejected from its corona. This force is known in 13 ways, and one way is the throne of light, the rabbi wrote. You read that at dawn when the train seems to travel into the sun, which is not even seen, just its underside, withheld somehow. Is that like God, you wonder? And put your book down so as to go back to sleep. Who can sleep when the earth approaches the sun? Blue mist and reflection interfere as apparitions, like a photograph of a hand that moves through green water and swims in the ocean. She swims through the book, laying kelp on rocks. For letters of the alphabet may be licked by the ocean as green bolts of the sun swirl out into space. I've thought of Albertine, she wrote. Talk to Skylar for Tony Simon. Always try to remember, really, I mean, picture it, frame by frame and with microscopic close-ups, even if what is seen as thread-like, delineated abstractions, as are the crossed wires that birds weave into a Milky Way spiral you may gaze into, stupefied, and discern a blue egg speckled individualistically, yet within a genre. You may recall a voice gently admonishing you for some raw repetitive behavior. You may barely know what your hands are doing, like tying invisible strings over and over in a dream. But the voice says, wait, and talk to Skylar, and insists on some unprecedented path out of the brutal outhouse to fairy green grasses in autumn and moss, where a baby lamb plays by your passing foot in the gold dust. The fourfold tree of life. I felt the breath of Canada that night on my neck, like an ice necklace, like purifying waves of night across a black lake. On January 17th, the sun rose and lit the sky with a star. I drank sea moss and ate spicy crab. I hung glass beads from my head. I looked at a book, small as a blue hand, with a tissue paper page and an inky, obsolete address in New York City. The sunlight was diluted, a dreamy dust. While I stared into it, a voice said, be careful. Life is supercharged with atomic grit and shooting stars. It's true. I once threw its core material to the ground just to see what would happen, and it happened. In the fourfold tree of life drawing, successive worlds are made with 22 green paths and a blackish brown dark red that goes off into infinity. William Blake gave me. With 3 stitches attached to the other self, like a kite, its paper wings float on the sidewalk, but darker, more sodden, the veinous string between the 2 selves. Contrary, one flickers away from the other. Now sound crashes, traces drift through the universe. You light a candle, then wait for the flash to fulfill the hollow time carves out. To fulfill the hollow, time carves out. Undoing, a dark river flows straight into the eye. Shiny black tripods could be seeds or teeth, and a rusted safety pin found outside on cement seemed to overflow also and may not pin the selves together. William Blake gave me the word wind today as a gift, and washed by saline, it is veiled, then its particles move. Oblate. Although there isn't a discernible shape, density, and vapor, the expelled ice crystal falls to the floor as though it were a shining pinkish jellyfish or a papery sheer baptismal dress fallen off the body. A cloud of threads you forgot once belonged to you. Belonged in the sense of made incidentally, obliviously, seemingly, the way a knitter knits interlocked rows of tomorrow. The atmosphere may be thought of as a very large knitted blue blanket with rips and deep holes that ripples around an oblate spheroid through which forces now pour in, for all we know, to augment human intractabilities, which float as mammoth icebergs, elephantine continents of pain. Only today I found out that oblate means austere, extended, contemplative, and horizontal plane, all at once. I mean, in the way words revolve, revealing various faces. The look of the bare, gnarled trees, transcriptions, are a writing also that bends under ice and just lies there under the sun as a wild, wiry text, too dense to read. And this is oblong. Today I noticed the light inserted in a new way across the pink kitchen table, new to the long string of past days, seems to pronounce an existence, an oblong crisscrossed with twigs. Something weird is going to happen. I feel it, said a man who sits in a red chair. Totally, said the woman across from him at the little cafe table. I sit in a field of lit bulbs on strings. The emergence and disappearance of light, the thing we feel but cannot describe, limit, or otherwise make happen. Sequelae. I'm mispronouncing that. And I even went to the dictionary and, the online dictionary to hear how it's pronounced. But I'm nervous, so I'm forgetting. Sequala, I think, something like that. The dust of the disillusion coats my hair. Each strand becomes quill-like, pointed, harsh. So I apply a kind of mud to my head and lay on the ground and watch moths rise up like rags with dark sails, little crazy ships in the night. My black, clumpy shoes trod the microbes as a pallid giant, unseeing its own condition, a sort of hypnosis. The sequelae speak with molecular gears. She showed me the tiny tooth of a pocket watch. It's still working, she said. I flew the giant beetle out the window at midnight, and that started its other life. That pulse in the dark, a clock also, it seems. We don't know what you are. Then I looked. At the small area of white around the black dots of 2 dice. Then I suddenly remembered a coil of gray rope on cement, maybe an old woman's hair dropped by a traveling bird or having crawled out of the earth. The poet is followed by whiffs of chamomile, elusive yet warmly afternoon. Then I suddenly remembered last night, my mother, who lay with a horse on the street, and I brought her a cup of coffee in a paper cup. I love this dreamy street and hope to return to it often. Now I will consult the dice. Help me, I ask, make a book out of the pieces of paper stuck in my throat. The pool. It seemed to be a rectangle floating in the shadow of someone's room, a bed you drink, or a pool of milk you may submerge yourself within as a nightgown or fluid blanket. Perhaps I misremember. There was a bed of black inside the dawn's blue field where I teetered on my way to a sink from which cold water flowed and silk hovered over the earth, the partial edge of which I can see over books on a table. For a moment, I feel us, but the pool evaporates when I close my eyes. Midday. Just start, my friend said, at midday or midnight. Never mind the dust in a pail, the scum shielding the potential purity underneath. I pick up the skinniest purple pen, soonest to run dry. My neck itches, my leg burns, my head tingles. The word permafrost occurs, and so it is written. I notice the word illuminations written on top of a small book. Committed to breathing within phases of anxiousness, I stare at the purple scrolling across the whiteness, unribboning. May it lead to breath. May it lead the way to breath, or an evaporation that also is a kind of white scum, or illumination. That's it. Thank you.
Well, thank you for such an illuminating poetry reading. Your poetry is, it's just electric. It's just brilliant poetry. It's visionary. It's imaginative. It hits the senses. I can see why, you mentioned Blake. I mean, his visionary was apocalyptic, and yours just hits the body and the mind and just takes us beyond, helps us transcend the personal into just such, surprising language. How do you...
Harry, may it be so. Thank you.
Huh?
I said, may it be so. Thank you.
Well, you just really transcend the personal. It just really, it gets all of our body and our mind just, it's almost eerie, the way you write. How do you write a poem? It's just visionary poetry. Could you just take us through one of your poems about how you approach a poem and write it, and let us in a little bit about your method?
Okay, I'm going to try to just give me a moment here to get it back. That won't be too hard. That's an interesting exercise. Okay, let me start with this one because it's very kind of concrete, or not very concrete, but it has more visual images than maybe some of the others, are more definable visual images. Then I looked at the small area of white around the black dots of two dice. That's observing a piece of, two dice. And then I suddenly remembered a coil of gray rope on cement came into my mind. And then for the poem then travels on just with associations. I don't know how they happen precisely. I don't think very many poets really do know exactly. That's the mystique of the mind, the consciousness, the muse. So I think, we have this, well, you could say we have an assortment of images and language floating around, and you don't quite know what'll be drawn up. But also, what to me is so thrilling about poetry, I guess, is the conjuration. That you're creating. You're creating a world or a glimpse of a place that's undefinable. It's, it's ineffable. So that happens too. Then I suddenly remembered last night my mother who lay with a horse on the street. I think that's fairly obviously a dream image, but we don't have to use the word dream all the time in poems, right? That gets a little boxing it in. What surprised me with this poem was, now I will consult the dice. Help me, I ask, make a book out of the pieces of paper stuck in my throat. That was really a surprise.
Well, that's what you do for us. You surprise us with your language.
Oh, good.
The word trobar from troubadour, its origin means to discover. And that's what you're doing. Okay. There was a period, if I may just use a reference within me to point out something there was a period in me for about 2 or 3 years where I would wake up in the middle of the night and just write usually a 2-page poem. Just these images just kept coming to me. And one thing I noticed, if I tried to comment on them, it would throw it off. And so I would just allow them to unfold image after image. And then I didn't know what they meant, but I would read it to my wife, Holly, the next morning, and she would say, "Oh, that's good." But so I appreciate the visionary poems. And I some people in our time write and we've lived through the confessional poets and, people locating themselves on the here and now. And obviously there's much more. You've just shown us one great example. And I love Blake. I love his poetry. And you're just fabulous poet, Yeah, you're just really,
thank you.
You really it's like they said, you're just really, it's like being wired, tuned into you, something beyond, just the ordinary. And so thank you very much for your ability and your language. Your language is so vivid and just a superlative use of language, light, right? There's a light within the words that you choose or that chose you to release them. So, I just really, I'm just grateful for you, Kimberly. So thank you. A couple of questions. One, since you went to Bard College, did you study with Robert Kelly?
Yes, I did. And he might be listening. He might not be, but yes, I'm grateful for the community of books and poetries and poets that I've known, over all these decades. Because, the poetries that we read, starting with Emily Dickinson and then many others, her teachers, they help ignite that reservoir within us, I did study with Robert Kelly, and I've stated this, I think he's the greatest poet writing in English, and right now. And his poetry has been a living, wonderful example of the enormity of what poetry can do and how it can affect us.
Well, I met him in the late 60s. He was teaching at Caltech out here. So I took my first long poem to him, and he said some nice things about it. But, I love The Common Shore, so many books. But I believe he may be the best writer of the long poem in our time. But just for the record,
I can't be alone in perceiving that. Check out if you haven't looked at some of his recent work. His books of the last, I would say, 15 years are awesome. It's like a new frequency.
You said in your bio you wrote your first poem when you were 16. But what is it so I won't ask you that question because you answered it. But what is it that attracts you to poetry?
Well, it's a form of co-creation. Language, how language interacts with our consciousness to bring us into new thresholds, new worlds, new, ways of perception, new understandings of reality or mystification of reality, in a sense. I love the brain pictures, the images that poetry can, elicit, devise, conjure, make.
You mentioned brain pictures. When I was, my son, when he was about 5, he and I met a woman with a son about 5, and I asked the other boy, I said, "What is the imagination?" And he said, "Pictures in the mind." And so you just mentioned brain pictures.
Good start.
Okay, before you started writing regularly in a serious way, who were some of the poets you read that influenced you?
Well, I actually started writing poetry at the age of 15. Somehow that makes a difference. I don't know why. I had read many, many books by then. Many books, the children's books, adolescent books, adult books. I had read a lot. And so I would have to say prose, and I can't name a singular book, but just all, especially the children's books that I read, some of those great ones, the Wolves of Willoughby Chase, that kind of brought you into that reading experience where you're transported, and I just hope that kids now are still able to have that. They are able to, and I hope that they seek it out, that experience of being transported. So there was that. Right around the threshold of when I started writing poetry, I came across an anthology, Naked Poetry. I'm sure you're familiar. That was a pretty big one, and that was very revealing and very exciting. It was like a range of poetries in there. We had to memorize a poem in 8th grade, and I memorized Matthew Arnold's Dover Beach. There's something in that experience that was an imprintation. I wouldn't over exaggerate that, but that was something.
And you mentioned in your bio that you worked at the Poetry Project. I went to, when I first started writing, I was living in New York City on 25th and 10th, and I used to go to the St. Mark's Church on the Bowery. And the Poetry Project was then, and I always loved that place. And how long did you work there?
I think about 5 years. Yeah, with Ed Friedman was the director, and it was what a wonderful, wonderful experience. So much poetry came through, and still is.
Yeah.
Quite a world. That's really cool that you went there, Harry.
Yeah. Well, I remember there was one night they did open readings, and one night they did, featured readings. And I heard so many different types of poet, from Jackson McLeau.
Yes, me too. Jackson McLeau.
And Paul Blackburn was the man who
wow,
was a host, and he used to bring this big old heavy audio recorder, and record the poets. And I read
he's a legend now. He's totally a legend at the Poetry Project and beyond, for sure.
I love The Cities. That's one of my top 5 books of all time by Grove Press. And I remember when he died, he was 44 from, I think it was lung cancer, and I was 31. And I realized, that was the first time I really realized how to use time and space. That's another thing that I think we learn in poetry, how to use time and space. And I realized, well, I have to really make each moment count, because I could go, in not too long a time. So I love his vision is different from Blake's. It's more what I see on, in an intersection, just as valuable as what you might see in a tree. Why don't Kim Noriega come on, and we can have a talk between all of us. And since Kimberly just finished reading, why don't you say something about Kim, even though you already did at the opening of the show? And then when you get through, Kim, could you please say something about Kimberly's poetry? Okay, here's Kimberly.
Well, Kim, your poetry initially really struck me, as I think I said, and I apologize for nervously looking at the name. Is a real poetry of witness and outrage, and yes, very, very powerful and forceful in that way. But don't wait up, because then it got some beauty in there, right? And with the roses and very tender evocations that came through. And, as I said, I thought that the poem about knitting, sort of like a parable about, which I think you intended, of just about living. Mm-hmm. That was a really kind of wise translation. So thank you. And I'm going to go look for that visual poetry. I love stuff like that.
Great.
Yeah. And, may it be that everything is cooled out in your life now. And it's a lot. It sounds like you've, witnessed a lot and heard of a lot. And yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. The book has a happy ending. Yeah. Or maybe a happy beginning. I don't know. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And, I think the thing that really struck me as you were reading, and Harry touched on this, but it was this, there was your language and your use of language and this really sense of electricity, and just like, I almost felt like I was in a lightning storm or something. I don't know why that is. I think it's I don't mean visually, I just mean energetically. It was so electric and so, just moving us beyond the realm. I love the way you start with an observation, so we're grounded, right? Like you mentioned about the dice. So we get this very tangible observation, and then bam, we're in another dimension, and we're off
That's totally right. It's a wild realm.
It's a wild realm, right? And you navigate it
Open yourself up to go there, I think.
Yeah, but you navigate it so precisely, and your language is so precise that, because you make some very big leaps, right? I mean, like, wow, all of a sudden we're in this fifth dimension, but because your language is so precise, we go willingly. And I think, to me, that's what really struck me so much, and is so enjoyable about your work. And I'm going to hunt you down now and buy your books.
Okay, and the Approximately Near, which is at metambeson.org, which is a fantastic
great
website, edited by and published by Charlotte Mandel.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of great poetry and visuals on there. And the book Approximately Near I still really love that little book of mine, and it's totally free. You can just read it right online. So
cool, very cool.
Thank you so much.
I'll still buy some. I like to support poets. So
absolutely.
That's great. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Harry. That was fun.
Well, I wanted to ask Kimberly one last question. We have about a minute. When you're writing one of these visionary poems, do you rewrite?
No, I don't generally tend to rewrite, but I do quite a bit of fixing and editing over time. I'll write a poem, and then maybe 3 months later, I'll pull it out of the notebook and type it up, and then I'll do some fixes, and then maybe another. I don't publish a lot, certainly not in books, that's for sure. I do hope to have 2 books forthcoming in the next 2 years or so, but so there's not quite that editing pressure, but for various reasons, I will go back to my poems maybe every 6 months, something like that, 8 months, and then I'll make some fixes. And occasionally we'll add on, and that was kind of a power that I learned relatively recently and late, that one can push the button and push forward. And that's very exciting too, right? So.
Yes, and so, well, I want to thank you both for really an astonishing, beautiful poetry reading. It's really exhilarating to me, and I'm just so thankful for both of you. You're just both wonderful poets, and thank you very much, Kim Noriega and Kimberly Lyons. And I'm going to make an announcement for next Tuesday. Next Tuesday, the marvelous Corinne Conley, Kay Wiseman, Bob Beecher, James Cushing, Garen Berry, all MPTF, will present the poetry of Federico Garcia Lorca from his collected poems. So please join us. And once again, before we go to the next show here, thank you, Kim Noriega and Kimberly Lyons.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.